This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry with agriculture broadcasters Orion Samuelson and Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH and your local Case IH dealer. Coming up on this weekend's broadcast about America's future fertilizer needs, where will those essential inputs come from? Hello, everyone. We welcome you to this weekend's broadcast. Mr. Pearson is alongside me here, and we were together earlier in the week.
We were indeed in Washington, D.C. at the gathering for the National Association of Farm Broadcasters. And Max, I learned a lot in D.C.
We heard a lot from current federal officials and some former ones, too, including a key trade negotiator from a previous administration, Greg Dowd, who says, for one thing, we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves in the future in terms of fertilizer supplies.
Absolutely, and I think it's in terms of not just what comes from Russia in terms of urea, but also what comes from China in terms of phosphorus. And I think, you know, we have to keep in mind that a lot of the problems that we had in these supply chains in fertilizer began last August and September with the blackouts in China.
What's the possibility the United States can start supplying some of its own fertilizer needs? We have nitrogen, but what could we do in the overall picture of NP and K?
Well, I think the K is the difficult conversation. We have Canada next door here, and I think obviously that's one of the better relationships in the world, but we got to make sure that we have that nailed down in terms of phosphorus. You know, we have a little bit of that application in Florida and other places, but, you know, China is a big piece of that puzzle in particular. And I think China, India, Brazil, Russia, they're all going to be working to make sure their own producers have a secure supply of fertilizer. And, this is a conversation that we need to have from a national security standpoint in the United States as well.
Have trade negotiations taken a back seat, either because of strong domestic commodity prices here, maybe the rhetoric that we saw after the pandemic that we need to keep more of what we're doing here at home and develop our own industries more and becoming less reliant on other countries?
Well, I don't think, we have to rely in agriculture on trading with other countries simply because we produce much more than we can consume domestically. But I do think from a policy in Washington standpoint, the challenge is we don't have trade promotion authority. It is expired. No country is going to negotiate with us in good faith without it, because this, as it stands now, whatever deal the executive branch would cut, Congress could completely renegotiate, and no country is going to enter into a conversation with us under those kinds of circumstances.
And a former Department of Agriculture official who worked in the area of trade, Ted McKinney, says just because we see the prices of commodities elevated right now, as he put it, we can't take our eye off the ball.
I think if anything, it's a lesson that you can't take for granted the situations, the normal trade flows you've experienced. I mean, this may play out in a very draconian way with respect to inputs like fertilizer, for example. Or, for example, a fair amount of corn and an even larger percentage of wheat, hard red winter wheat, which is the bread product, is produced there. And you take away a third of the world's supply of hard red winter wheat, and you've got some issues to deal with. Maybe not in the U.S., so we better be attuned to our neighbors in the Middle East, in Africa, and elsewhere. So I hope this war ends quickly for many reasons, not the least being our or the goodwill of others around the globe, but by golly, it's got major consequences. So yes, we must stay focused on that.
Ted McKinney, who dealt with trade on a daily basis in his role at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And then there were other matters.
There certainly were, the cattle market being a big one. Senator Charles Grassley from Iowa recently wrote a bill with several other senators, and that bill had a hearing in the Senate Ag Committee, and it was spicy. I asked the senator how he thought it went.
I was very, very satisfied with it, the one that was in the Senate. And of course, in the Senate, I participate in the hearings, and I was able to ask my questions, and I thought we had a good balance. Obviously, the two people that support our legislation, I agreed with them more than the two that didn't, but we did have a necessary good discussion hearing all sides. Then I went the next day all across the campus to the House of Representatives. And of course, I can't participate there, but I went there to listen to the Big Four because I wanted to see what they said. They didn't want to discuss the problem that my bill is taking care of because they spent most of their 5 minutes that they had discussing things like how many workers they have, how much they pay their workers, how good they are to their workers, how safety things are concerned, et cetera, et cetera. And then when the questioning by the House members came, I didn't have time to stay, so I left. But I wasn't very satisfied that the big packers really wanted to discuss the issues that we're concerned about.
These issues that you're concerned about, that this bill is written to try and address, Senator, you've been working on this in true bipartisan fashion. Can you tell us what the next steps are for this bill?
Well, first of all, I want to compliment Secretary Vilsack because he's got to administer this if it becomes law, and he worked with a lot of technical changes. That doesn't mean that the administration's saying specifically they're supporting our law, but the President of the United States twice has mentioned the need for legislation. So we have good cooperation also from Secretary Stabenow, Chairman of the Ag Committee, and so she had the hearing. She wouldn't have had to have a hearing, but I think she's working in good faith with us, and I think she will soon have what we call a markup to get the bill out of committee. And then she has even spoken to Senator Schumer, who sets the agenda for the United States Senate, and she says that he would like to bring the bill up. Now, there aren't many days left this year between now and the election that the Senate's going to be in session, so I don't know whether they're speaking promising too many people their bill are coming up, but I have a good feeling at this point between Senator Stabenow and what she says about Senator Schumer that we'll get the bill up.
That was Senator Charles Grassley from Iowa discussing the moves he's making in the cattle market. Now it's time to discuss the rest of the agricultural markets. Joining us this week is Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. Clayton, thanks for being here.
Great to be back, Mike.
Planting is running slow. We saw that from the crop progress report on Monday. When does the market get concerned about this cold, wet weather through the spring?
Yeah, that's interesting. An awful lot of the press that you read, you look at Twitter feed and that kind of thing, everybody's really up in arms over it. But up until just the last couple of days, most of our customers pretty much across the country are kind of like, it's not that big a deal. I'm not worried yet. It's we'll get out there in due time. The exception to that, though, would be the people in the far northwest. They're starting to get a little freaked out, and understandably so.
Yeah.
North Dakota is crazy. I mean, it's like 40-degree ground temperature and that kind of thing. I mean, it's they got the work cut out for them for sure. But as far as the bulk of the belt, we're behind the pace, but I don't think it's a critical thing yet. But the reason that Northwest is so important this year is because we all know that we're playing with a potentially very tight carryover. So the prevent planting date in most North Dakota is May 25th. So we basically have a little under 3 weeks for them to, kind of get on the stick here. There's no doubt we'll have some PP acres taken there, I'm sure. Okay. But 3 weeks, that's a long time. And right now it looks like things are kind of leaning towards, improving conditions.
All right.
Certainly most everywhere, but even there it's leaning that way eventually.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching this for some time. Clayton, we've also been watching the Brazilian corn crop, their second crop, Safrinha corn. What have you heard? How is it developing?
There's a real mixed feeling on that whole thing. I guess welcome to commodity markets, but some people say, okay, yeah, sure, we're going to lose whatever, 10 million metric tons or something like that. It's still probably going to be an all-time record high Safrinha crop, and I tend to fall in line with that. Most of the area has pollinated fine, so we're talking about a fill issue here, and no question, some rain would be extremely beneficial, but to have a total disaster, I think we're past the hump. That's not going to happen. But again, like I said before, we're on kind of according to some people, a razor's edge of comfort stocks here, and so if you were to lose more than 10 million metric tons, it would be an issue. But this comes down to the whole question of it sort of pass the baton. I mean, there's no question they're going to have enough production to provide ample supply to the world during their normal exporting period, and then maybe it just makes a logistical switch, from northern hemisphere to southern and back to northern kind of thing. More it'd have to be more finely tuned. You know what I mean? So I don't know. You've always got the potential for that to be a real big issue, but our opinion is it's probably not going to be much more of one than we've already seen.
With all of that being the case, Clayton, where do you sit on getting your new crop corn marketed at this point in the year?
We've made some sales. Unfortunately, I mean, in full disclosure, we made some before everything went nuts a few months ago. But we've been pretty conservative. Actually, we made a fantastic sale just 4 or 5 days ago now, right before the big break. But we're being conservative. I think as far as actual cash sales, I mean, how aggressive can you be? I mean, we're basically about 30% sold as far as our cash advice. And that would go for soybeans too. But on the other hand, for those who are comfortable with some trading risk, I think some kind of put-call combo here is very advisable. It's not easy, and the margins keep going higher and higher, it seems like, but I'm not a fan of just buying an outright put.
Okay.
I mean, for heaven's sakes, an at-the-money D's put is like 70 cents. I mean, what are you really guaranteeing?
Yeah.
By the time that time premium goes away, you've lost this beautiful price.
We have indeed, Clayton, and we'll be back for more with that discussion with Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. And we're talking markets with Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. And Clayton, the wheat market has been on fire. What are some of the global events this week that have really added fuel to that fire?
It has been crazy, Mike. And wheat just, for the last 6 months has been out of the park, as far as volatility goes. But, the big announcement a couple of days ago was, it was kind of a strange deal. Some of the Indian officials said that their wheat crop has been damaged pretty severely, maybe 15 million metric tons, something like that. Probably worst case scenario. But as such, they've taken a move kind of like we've seen other countries do with other commodities. That they announced that they intend to, or at least toying seriously with the idea of cutting exports just to make sure they have adequate domestic supply. But the next day, a different Indian official said, no, it's not that bad. We're probably not going to do this. So the market's trying to sort that out, I think. But world, if you look at the exporter stocks, the world exporter stocks, not just total stocks, but exporter stocks, which obviously means you take China out of the situation. It's thin. There's just not much room to play with there. So if they were going to take that off, the missing element in the wheat picture, we think, is U.S. exports. And everybody's so bullish wheat because the world's supply is getting so tight, but until that translates into demand for U.S. wheat, it's kind of what's the big deal? And maybe this would be the tipping point to finally do that.
Is it just that domestic wheat prices are too high above the international pricing scheme?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think so. It's we're kind of like the supplier of last resort, it seems like, to the world. I mean, the channels are well established for Europe to be such a big exporter, and Russia. And Russia is another factor. The news came out a couple of days ago. The EU had, when they expanded their crude oil ban, they also talked about making some moves. It's a little muddy, but making some moves in terms of financing Russian transportation systems and insuring them. And so that kind of slows down the whole, export ability, of Russia's. And so just one more, bullish story out of the Russia-Ukraine situation, that Russia has the wheat, but how easy is it going to be for them to get it out, let alone Ukraine, which looks, less
tough.
And less possible every day, it seems like.
Indeed. Let's look at the soybean market. We saw that go pretty wild this past week, and bean oil in particular went crazy. What's happening in that market?
Well, it seemed like bean oil was down for the count for a while there. It was crazy. Some of the highs it had reached came down, and then just a rocket ship right back up again. Well, the funds, I think, are in love with it, for one thing. We're definitely seeing more and more of this food versus fuel argument, and that's going to be the case, too. I read something yesterday talking about how they're going to start using bean oil more and more to make tires. So that's really what we need, is another demand category for bean oil, but things are already so tight. But, with all the government moves going towards a more aggressive use of biodiesel and trying to encourage it and so forth, something's got to give, it seems like. I mean, the handwriting's on the wall that the demand for bean oil is going to be through the roof. And, sure, crush margins are great, but they can only get so good. So like I said, something's going to have to give in terms of rationing demand there, we think.
We'll see where it goes from here. It's Clayton Pope from Clayton Pope Commodities.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Despite the wet, cold weather across much of the country, farmers are getting excited for planting season. And a part of that for many growers through the Corn Belt means springtime tillage, getting things ready for that seed to sit in the soil. On this week's Tech segment, Chad Colby has an update on some tillage equipment for us.
Over the years, there's been a lot of new tillage practices. One of those has been the use of strip till. That's really nothing new. You see that in various places here across the Midwest, and essentially in the fall primarily, you'll see producers go in and put those strips in the field, and those strips, they would have the nutrients for the crop for the following year, and they would go back and plant in those. But there is kind of a new tool that's been out, and I actually saw one run recently, and I wanted to share it with you, and it's called a strip refreshener. And basically how it works is, primarily it's used in the spring, but it can be used in the fall. But essentially what it's going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to improve that zone where you're going to run the planter. Now, obviously, in the climate that we're in, a lot of producers are taking that to the next level, and they're adding some nutrients along the way. You can see right here is this tractor's got externally mounted tanks, and they're putting some nutrients right there in that seed zone. But as far as how the row unit works, the part I really like about it is the adjustability. And whether you've got a specially equipped bar that's 3-point mounted, or as you can see here in the background, a fully customized 24-row unit, you've got in-cab controls where you can infinitely adjust that row unit. Maybe you're trying to just revive those strips from the following year. Maybe you had a tough winter. Again, maybe you're trying to add a nutrient. There's a lot of great things it can do, especially if you're trying to get that optimum seed bed ready for spring, especially maybe like this year if you've had a wet spring. Again, a really interesting tool. If you are doing strip till, it's definitely something you should take a serious look at.
Thank you, Chad. It's a busy time of year for a lot of farmers trying to get that tillage done, trying to get that seed into the ground, and that can add stress. Later on in the program, we'll be talking to mental health expert Adrian DeSutter, so stay with us.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. After a busy week of travel for the two of us, we were in Washington, D.C. for that meeting of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting. Every year, the members of NAFB gather there to visit with representatives of the administration, as well as those who have been elected to the House and Senate who deal with farm policy and other ag-related issues. We heard a lot this week. In fact, there were 3 cabinet officers represented in those sessions: the Agriculture Secretary, Transportation Secretary, the EPA Administrator, and there was talk about renewable fuels.
There certainly was. The place where those 3 cabinet secretaries intersect is renewable fuels, and there were a lot of opinions expressed during our time in Washington. We had a panel, and some members came out hard against renewable fuels, against liquid fuels more broadly. However, that's not the only attitude in Washington about renewable energy. We had the opportunity to hear from retired Vice Admiral Dennis McGuinn. He has spent a lot of time looking at the energy needs required by America's military. In fact, in an average year, the Department of Defense uses 86 million barrels of oil to keep the American military ready to do its job around the world. Admiral McGuinn believes that we can better serve the world and better serve the needs of America's military by incorporating renewable energy. And that's a story he is bringing to the Hill and he brought to share with us. And I asked him, with these time of volatile energy prices, has that affected America's military readiness?
The good news is Americans' military readiness is fantastic. The bad news is they are tasked very, very heavily. They're tasked by traditional military threats, national security threats. Thank God we have these fine young Americans in the eastern part of the NATO alliance to keep the alliance safe, to keep those nations safe. But instability that can be caused by so many things, including climate change, is going to increase the amount of humanitarian assistance, disaster recovery operations that our military has been doing superbly for literally decades. There's a lot of instability that will be there as a result of the spin-offs, I would call them, from the Ukraine-Russian war. I think that the competition for energy is going to be increasing. I am hoping that we can accelerate our transition away from fossil fuels to really get to a much more diverse and much more abundant, and oh, by the way, cleaner energy portfolio. Renewable energy, absolutely key. In our great rural economies, those great wind turbines, solar panels that are very, very compatible with the great productivity and farming that goes on are fantastic. They're great examples, visual examples of how you can transition your energy and oh, by the way, save a lot of money.
Looking at biofuels and renewable fuels is not new for the U.S. military. In your role as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, you experimented with this. Could you tell us a little bit about how the U.S. military is working with renewable fuels today?
Yes, we started back about 5 years ago. We had a program that was in partnership with Secretary of the Agriculture at the time, Tom Vilsack, and my boss, Secretary Ray Mabus. So the two secretaries, one of Navy, one of Agriculture, formed up a farm to fleet program that was figured, how do we get enough of the right type of feedstocks to be processed into biofuels that could be used in military equipment. We knew it was early. We knew that we weren't going to be able to achieve scale and the lower prices that come with that, but we said, let's prove that military equipment can use biofuels. So one of the most dramatic examples of this was we flew an FA-18 Super Hornet on 100% bio-based fuel, and it performed flawlessly. We called it drop-in fuel. We want it coming out of the truck into the fuel tanks, through the fuel pumps and the burner cans and turbines, and it was flawless. That proved that you can do drop-in fuel. It effectively is the moral equivalent of jet fuel, and you can do it in a way that you don't have to change out everything in that airplane or that equipment. And oh, by the way, we did the same thing for ships, and I think this will increase. We are working with our military is working with civil aviation fuel advancements or innovations, and we are going to be seeing sustainable aviation fuels more and more, and I think the military will be a part of that partnership that increases them.
Thanks to Admiral McGuinn for bringing this issue up. Max, you can tell that's a topic that man is passionate about.
You know, I have a little bit of respect indeed for former military veterans, especially of his rank.
You bet. Commanded an aircraft carrier.
Well, we're still getting trapped in grain bins. Did you hear the story this week?
I had.
It was near Sturgis, Kentucky, where two gentlemen were trapped in a grain bin. The thing that comes to mind is the resources that came to bear there in Union County, Kentucky. The volunteers who knew what to do and had a grain bin rescue tube. After working for 5 hours to carefully bring those gentlemen alive out of the grain bin. It's still happening, still having entrapments, but there are many more success stories now, Mike.
That is good to hear. I'm glad to hear there was a happy ending for those farmers.
There's more coming up on This Week in Agribusiness. We'll talk about the stresses of this season and the stresses that are there all the time, actually, for the people of agriculture during this Mental Health Awareness Month. Stay with us here. This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Farmers right now are grappling with a lot in agriculture and across the country. We've got droughts, we've got floods, we've got high winds, we've got volatile market prices, and we've got concerns about input availability and access as planting season gets closer. Max, those are not fun things to have to deal with, and certainly not as they're trying to prepare for planting. I imagine that's adding a lot to the stress level in rural America.
You know, even robust commodity prices have their own stress level. Making the right decisions when you have so so few opportunities to make that right call of marketing. And we are going to talk this month about mental health awareness in our rural farm families, as we did a year ago with Adrienne DeSutter. Adrienne lives on a farm in Knox County, Illinois, and she is a counselor who has worked on these health issues with farm families. One thing we talked with her about are the stresses of this planting season. And you add to that, actually, the stress of Mother's Day weekend. Adrienne, a mother herself, shared with me her comments.
Absolutely. You know, one of the first things that my mother-in-law told me when Drew and I got engaged, my husband's mom said, "Now, just so you know, Mother's Day is probably not going to be your day after all in this marriage." And so it's something I've kind of held on to. And you're right, farm women can be in the field, they can be active at home, they can be taking care of business in the books. They do all sorts of different things on the farm family. But I think one of the biggest things we need to remember is that women especially are really good at taking care of other people, and we don't always want to be the first to take care of ourselves. We've all heard the oxygen mask, you know, where you've got to put your own oxygen mask on in case of emergency first if you're going to be able to help other people. I think we really need to keep that in mind and not just wait for the turbulence, not just wait for the crisis times, but at all times, you know, finding those little bits of joy in every day or those little bits of relaxation, whether that's throwing on some music and dancing in the kitchen, whether that is, you know, taking a hot shower for just 5 minutes, whatever it is that you find joy in, making sure that you're able to take time to do those things.
Since you mentioned the in-laws, I know that can be a real source of pressure on the farm. I've had a number of women say, you know, this is kind of a difficult situation in which we operate here. Communication really becomes essential, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, fostering the relationship with your in-laws is really, really crucial when it comes to a farm family. I, you know, didn't come from a farm family, but 10 years ago, I jumped right into one. So it was a difficult navigation of, you know, where is my place on the farm, or is there one? And how do I not encroach on the traditions and things that have already been happening here at DeSutter Farms? So it's definitely tricky, but I think, again, being able to speak openly with I'm so fortunate to have a mother and father-in-law here that we're actually in their home right now. So they're super gracious, super, you know, willing to help and willing to be supportive. And I think part of that comes from just being a family where we try to keep those lines of communication open.
That isn't always easy, is it? And sometimes it's a real struggle dealing with that other generation that isn't really direct blood relation to start with there.
Absolutely, and I know women all over the place struggle with this, men as well, that are jumping into their wife's farm family and operations. It is definitely a struggle, and I think part of what can help us is just being open about those struggles with a friend or with other farm organizations. We meet people that can kind of talk about how they share some of those struggles. I try to be really careful about the things that I say to other people, of course, because we want to have our own boundaries and our own privacy on our farm. But at the same time, it's okay to say, you know, I'm really struggling with a certain part of, you know, figuring out where I fit or whatever. Those conversations that we have where we can relate to other people, whether that's at, you know, at a meeting, a farm organization meeting, whether that's, you know, in a message on Twitter or something, but however we can make those connections. And just to realize we're not the only ones going through certain struggles, sometimes that in itself can be the weight lifted off our shoulders that we need.
Maybe someone else has dealt with the situation and did so successfully, and you can borrow an idea from them. Thank you so much, Adrienne. We look forward to visiting with you again next weekend and getting some ideas for some of these challenging issues that can weigh on us in agriculture. Have a great week.
Thanks so much, Max.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. To some of you, a discussion about drought will seem strange. For others of you, it's become a way of life, we know. We did note at the Drought Monitor this week, Greg, for the entire country, the drought footprint has shrunk ever so slightly.
Now, that's right. And generally, as it applies to Corn Belt locales, parts of the eastern plains, western plains, a different story. Texas and Oklahoma, forget about it. And a small sliver of the Pacific Northwest, generally along the Cascades and West, improvement still going on throughout much of this part of the western United States. And of course, as you get up into the Red River Valley of the north, Grand Forks, Fargo, Oslo, Minnesota, northward, too much of a good thing. We're into at least a moderate flood situation there. We'll have to watch as the headwaters get going farther south with probably that west and southwestern Corn Belt getting too wet. But there are drier days for the eastern part. Here's a nice sizable, almost late winter type trough across the Pacific Northwest, northern Rockies, and it's a parade of weather systems that move ashore, generate their moisture, drop into this part of the country. Ahead of it, incredible summer-like warmth, late winter chill behind it. You know it's going to set the stage for severe and more rain. Late season moisture for the northern and central Rockies, and another feature coming ashore in the Pacific Northwest. So this pattern remains active. And looky here, we're into May. We're past the usual precip dates that usually concludes at least the wet season, April 1, and we've got a couple of systems, one into California, one across the plains. This is July. This is more or less early springtime, and again, heading into California, the first of a couple of weather systems and shower activity perhaps as far south as the Imperial Valley. Look at the late season rain snow mixture across the central and southern Rockies, and ahead of this weather system, 90, maybe 95 degree heat. It's a blowtorch here. Too much wet weather farther to the east, and showers and thunderstorms. It will turn severe. That'll be a multi-day event, I should say, Max, across the plains and western Corn Belt this week.
Yeah, we're talking right about through the plain states, north to the south, and into the western Corn Belt area, a very sharp temperature differential there.
That's right. You know, get into the high plains, a drop off. Now, you know, here we are in early May. We've essentially gone from late winter, early spring, bypass springtime. And this particular setup, especially around the I-80 corridor and southward early in the week, carries with it June, almost early July type temperatures, warmth, and humidity, and a breeze and a dry spell of weather. In the eastern Corn Belt, we need it in this particular area. Lots of wind across the plain states, and again, you get into roughly North Platte to Oklahoma City on west. It is way too dry. It is drought-ridden, and we get some relief, but it may come at a price with recurrent clusters of severe storms this week. Red River into the high plains and points on east western Corn Belt. We do get several days, maybe a week to 10 days, if not longer, of opportunities into the eastern belt. Warming soils, drying soils. We should be able to make catch up here with planting operations in much of the Corn Belt eastern areas as the week wears on. Severe potential again, central and southern plains. This is the dividing line. Too wet east into the Ozarks, the Arklatex. Too dry and drought-ridden as you go back to the west. And again, a couple of thunderstorms expected. And boy, the humidity values will climb into summertime values. So keep an eye on it. I'm sure the AC cab will be going full tilt there. And more severe storms later in the week. Kansas, Oklahoma, northern Texas. Warmth and humidity as far north as the southern Corn Belt. Even a couple of thunderstorms, Max, in the desert southwest.
Eastern Corn Belt will have a good window of opportunity. Do I follow you to say that?
Correct. Yes, 7 to 10. Maybe if you treat the weather guy nicely, a couple of weeks, hopefully. Again, it's way too wet now in the far west, especially southwestern Corn Belt, and that's where the storms play out. The caveat to all this, normally weather moves west to east, is this circulation that's actually going to kind of back things up and slow things up the eastward progression of weather. In any event, cool across the northeast of New England, wet for the mid-Atlantic region. We need more rain in that particular part of the country. Here is a midsummer-like feel across much of the Corn Belt eastern areas, and severe storms back west of the Missouri mid to late portions of the week. And again, this circulation is going to actually begin to bend back and drop southward. It might even take on a tropical feel. Shower activity for the Carolinas in through Florida, warmth and humidity into the Tennessee Valley. And this weather system again across Texas and Oklahoma means showers and thunderstorms, heavy and severe.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. Quite often, as we look through the spring season, we can see such extremes in weather in just a short distance and in a short period of time. Let's go back to Greg to see just what might be coming along this week. Give us a look at that precipitation map and who might have a chance to dry out and get some field work done.
You know, we talk about in the weather business, temperature gradients, pressure gradients, wind gradients. there's a soil moisture gradient. It's just the deviation of the change from one spot to another, and it's extremely small in this corridor here across Kansas and Oklahoma. You go west of Oklahoma City, roughly, you're into the worst drought. You go east, now we've got flooding issues in this corridor. We'll get moisture in some of these worst drought areas. It may come at a price, severe weather potential, and this is not what we want to see across the Red River Valley of the north into the southern Canadian Prairie, down through the mid-Missouri Valley as well. Later the week, yeah, probably towards the following weekend, some scattered coverage, moisture, fair coverage, eastern Corn Belt. There is a window of opportunity this week here. Watch this weather system. It's going to be at least tracking westward with time. Moisture in some of the dry areas of Carolinas, maybe an inch or two of downpours, desert southwest, and some good coverage moisture, Pacific Northwest.
Many of our friends have been talking about how cool it has been for the week of May 16th. Will it still be cool across the northern tier of states?
It will, and cool and or cold air masses in spring and summertime mean rain, and you're going to get rain. This is a pretty impressive trough for this calendar date. Look at the range of temperatures west to east across the country. Summer here, springtime back west of the Divide in particular, and this corridor is ripe for severe weather. It's been late in going from the Great Lakes back into the southeastern plains. At least we get moisture. This is part of the country, too much of it again into the Canadian Prairie. It's welcome in the Pacific Northwest, dry time east, and back into dry weather back southwest.
Well, as we lead up toward Memorial Day, that week of May 23rd, many folks will have some plans for the observance. Many of our farmer friends plan to be in the field.
Yeah, that's
Share
right.
with us what you see.
It is going to be late season and a character building season going forward. The cool to cold air retrogrades northward, more of a west to east broad upper level wind flow, some warmth into much of the Corn Belt, warming soils, good news there, but there's still a contrast of temperatures, so there's still some late season moisture, Northern California, Pacific Northwest. Don't need any more of it here, Canadian Prairie. Look at the expanse of rain across the Corn Belt, normal precip down through Florida, still high and dry New Mexico. Fires continue on there and in through Texas.
And a week after Memorial Day, as we get into the month of June, we can still see some very cool temperatures this time of year. What do you see now?
And more of those cool to cold air blobs here through the Canadian Prairie. Remember, high pressures here. It's a clockwise flow. The warmth is across the southern half of the country, and you mix it with this strong jet stream pattern for even early June, and you come up with this particular setup. It is a busy one. First, we highlight the dry areas still ongoing in through California, the southwest. Hopefully, we get into a monsoon season here. West Texas, more fire potential here. Here's this gradient back into above average moisture. Probably some late season field work and planting delays continue on many areas of the Corn Belt into the Tennessee and Ohio valleys. And this setup for severe weather is ripe in this particular part of the country. Moisture is good news for this part of the country. Not so good ongoing flooding for areas of the Canadian Prairie. Moisture continues on Pacific Northwest.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
This is the story of a tractor that did its duty in the fields of England and made its way to the coast. This is what salt water can do to a tractor. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. Oh, they are beautiful. They shine. They make your shop look better and function better. Go to the website to find out more at storlock.com. Well, Ian Whitburn, as a young man in England, worked in the fields with the Ferguson tractors on many occasions. He fell in love with them, even though his career path took him through a different route. He became an accountant. But he loves those Fergusons so much, Ian told me he now has 24 of them, including this one. This is how it looked when it was rescued. The Atlantic Ocean seawater had not been at all kind to this Ferguson. After performing the typical field chores for the farmers in southwest England, this Ferguson TEF-20 was then used to launch boats. Launch boats down into the water for the tourists. We're not sure if it ever went into the drink, but it got close enough that the repeated exposure took a toll on the fenders, the wheels, about every part of Old Fergie, as Ian calls him. Ian found this tractor on the beach. It had always been a local tractor. He knew the story on it. This 26 horsepower Ferguson, made 67 years ago in Coventry, England. Let's get the Big Iron report now. Big Iron Auctions from Mark Stock.
Well, hello, Max. Four-wheel drive tractors are getting a lot of attention now on BigIron.com. This past week, we sold a John Deere 9300 four-wheel drive tractor. This was a one-owner machine in Lyons, Kansas. Had 4,260 hours. It sells for $113,250. Now, this week here on our May 11th sale with over 1,700 items, we've got several four-wheel drive tractors. In fact, the Rocking Y Feed Yard out of Gordon, Nebraska, they've got a John Deere 8770 four-wheel drive tractor. Plus, they've got 133 items altogether, including a New Holland HW305 5S self-propelled windrower. Now, K&N Rexroth LLC, they're retiring out of Gurley, Nebraska. They've got a 2015 Case IH Steiger 370 heavy duty. This machine's got 2,496 hours. They've also got a 2012 Case IH Magnum 290 tractor with 2,869 hours. They've also got a 1984 International Tandem Axle grain truck with a steel box and a hoist. And they've got a 2010 John Deere 9770 combine with 1,769 separator hours. We've also got Steve Harper in Hugonton, Kansas, folks. They've got some outstanding equipment, including a 2017 John Deere S670 combine. There's a John Deere 712C cornhead. They've got a Brent 1196 and a Brent 1194 grain cart. This equipment is in outstanding condition and will sell for Steve Harper here on May the 11th. Go to BigIron.com, Max. Check out all of the four-wheel drive tractors and all the other good quality equipment that sells with no reserves.
Well, we're continuing to get to know FFAers from around the country, looking at the future of agriculture. And this week, we're meeting with Amara Livingston. She is the Wisconsin FFA State Parliamentarian. Amara, thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I think first, I've got to ask, for folks who are not in FFA, can you tell us what the duties are for the state parliamentarian?
Right, so the parliamentarian is the person who is focused on all parliamentary law and has Robert's Rules of Order memorized so that we can help out at our meetings, that we're doing things properly. In addition, I'm responsible for the Constitution and bylaws for the organization and review it yearly to make sure it is up to date. And lastly, one of my other duties is to be a part of the delegate process that happens at state convention.
Wow, a lot of things to keep track of in that role. Amara, over this past year, what have been some of the highlights for you as an FFA state officer?
Yeah, so in addition to the roles that I have as state parliamentarian, we also all serve on the same level as facilitators for our section. And one of my highlights has been the chapter visits that we get to do. I've been able to visit 25 different schools a full day, if not 2 days, and facilitate every class. And that's the most rewarding part for me because I remember every single one of those chapter visits as a high school student, and it's rewarding to know that when I walk into a school this year, those students are going to remember what we do.
Amara, what was it that prompted you to join FFA in the first place?
Yeah, so I joined FFA because I was drawn to my local FFA chapter service projects. I remember vividly they hosted a Walk for Water where they fundraised for a well to be built in Uganda. And I thought immediately, that's amazing. That's an organization I want to be a part of.
As you look out to the future, what does that hold for you? Do you plan to stay in the agriculture industry?
Yeah, so my major right now is agriculture education. So I will either end up as a classroom teacher or somewhere in extension agency services. And I'm excited to be a part of agriculture education and still continue in FFA, hopefully being able to move on into roles such as national FFA facilitators for some of their national FFA conferences.
Before we let you go, Amara, when is your convention for the Wisconsin FFA?
Our convention is June 14th through the 16th in Madison, Wisconsin.
Fantastic. Amara Livingston, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us here on This Week in Agribusiness, ladies and gentlemen. This weekend is a big weekend, Max. There is a holiday, of course. It is Mother's Day this weekend. And I think back to my childhood growing up on the farm. My mom would keep us all in line, keep us out away from the sows when they were farrowing, and generally kept us safe. Max, I imagine you've got some farm mom experiences.
You think about everything the farm mom today is in charge of. All of the responsibilities they must handle, including those family matters that matter as well. We thought you should hear from some farm moms across the country.
I'm Melanie Fink from Gurmansville, Pennsylvania, and I'm proud to be a farm mom because farm kids work together. Working outside and working with our family and instilling great work ethic in our kids is one of the best things we can do for our kids on the farm.
Hey y'all, I'm Lindsay Kimbrell from Itasca, Texas, and I love being a farm mom because I'm able to watch my children do things beyond what most adults ever get the opportunity to experience. I love knowing that they understand the roots of life and what it takes to feed and clothe the world. And I absolutely love watching them outside enjoying what makes our living.
Hi, I'm Angie Bailey from Gresham, Oregon. I love being a farm mom, or maybe more accurately, a mom who farms, because it has allowed me the opportunity to continue the legacy of my own farmer mother, who instilled in me the value of being a woman of faith, family, and farm.
Hi, I'm Roxy McCormick of Crook, Colorado, and I love being a farm mom because what better way to raise my 4 children than in God's country? Teaching them the respect of the land, equipment we use, and each other. We try to instill the importance of family, helping our neighbors, and what a hard day's work is like in all of our children. This is more than a job for us, it is a lifestyle.
We appreciate all the women of agriculture the year around, but especially on this weekend, we pay tribute to the farm moms. I want you to do that.
Yes, indeed. Moms, thank you so much. And to my own mom, thank you for keeping me alive this long.
I need for folks to see what I saw this weekend. This week in Washington, D.C., I want them to take a look at this. Standing at the Secretary of Agriculture's podium in Washington, Mike Pearson. Wait till Tom Vilsack hears about this. We'll see you next weekend on This Week in Agribusiness. Have a great Mother's Day weekend. Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.